the one thing that whoever created that thought process never had a long-term instrument in a high inflation environment to put together. When you put those two together, inflation and compound interest beat the shit out of each other for you, the investor. All you got to do is have enough money for the beer and for the chips to watch it all go, the fight go on, and it all works out better for you. You win on both sides. No matter who you bet for, you still won.
Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso. We just wrapped up our interview with Aaron Chapman, and today we're talking about, or this will be part 2 of that interview. Anthony, on the second part, what are a couple of takeaways you had?
It's hard to pick one or two because this interview was actually almost 2 hours.
Yeah,
which is why we cut it into 2 pieces, and then we had to unfortunately cut out some, which was difficult because it was so much great stuff that Aaron had shared. But if I had to pick one takeaway in this part, is he talks about the advantages of using a long-term debt instrument. Cameron, that means a 30-year mortgage for an appreciating asset like single-family real estate. To me, and how he dove deep into it, was very enlightening. Cam, what were some of your takeaways?
I enjoyed that part as well, but on this one, what I really enjoyed was actually kind of his take on IBC. He takes a few minutes and he shares with us kind of his first impressions of IBC and what he thought of it. And then he comes full circle and then shares with us how he's using it today. So it's always good to hear somebody else's perspective. And that's what I enjoyed out of this one.
What I thought was cool is not only he's teaching his kids about infinite banking, but he's making it a requirement to be part of the will. If you're not funding a policy, you are out of the will, which I thought was cool. So Chad and Sarah, well, you guys are already doing it, so you guys are safe to be in my will. Enjoy the episode.
Take care.
Ultimately, if they're raising it 3%, you got $100,000 property ready for $1,000 a month. So let's say year one, you're renting it for $1,000. You're getting $200 a month in cash flow. Is that an unfathomable scenario to get $200 a month cash flow on $1,000 a month rent when we got a $429 payment?
I don't know. It's reasonable.
Yeah,
seems really reasonable. So, and that's a principal and interest payment, by the way. You still have to get your tax and insurance there.
Yeah.
Now, year two, you raise it by 3%. So, what is 3% of 1,000?
30.
$30, right? And I say it takes a little bit for people. People want to say 300 all the time. So you fought that one really well.
And so my podcast, I'm like, I really don't want to screw this up.
I wanted to say 300. I'm not gonna lie.
Everybody does the 300 thing, and then they get disappointed when it's only 30. It's like, crap, it's only 30. I'm like, don't get disappointed. Only 30 is kind of cool to think, oh crap, I'm only getting $30. So remember, it's not that hard to raise your rent then by 3%. If it's only $30.
Yeah.
But if you got $200 a month cash flow year one, what do you believe year two should have with a $30 a month increase?
Plus 30.
Plus 30.
Yeah.
You guys, I can
360, right?
Yeah.
So it's basically $30 a month, right? So you got 230 from 200. Well, when you do the numbers on that, I'm not going to make you guys do this, and we might have a longer pause with dead air. When you figure
15.
Check him out. He's already got it. So 15% compound growth in your cash flow. That's huge. You're getting a compound decline in the instrument you're paying it back with at 7%, but a compound growth of 15% in the cash flow that you're making. That's a massive arbitrage. That's more than double the difference.
So that's that was awesome, Aaron. I just wanted to make sure Cameron understood, right? So we started with 200 cash flow. And that $30 increase, now that's a 15% increase from the 200.
Correct.
Right?
15% compound growth in your 200.
Exactly. Plus, we paid a little bit of principal down on the loan, right?
Maybe it's under $1,000.
Or let's just even say, under. Okay, but then we also appreciated on $100,000, right? That value is, instead of the house being 100, I don't know if we're using 2 or 3 now, but now we've compounded on the 100, right?
Yeah.
And
And the thing is, even if we don't compound on the 100, even if there's not even any appreciation, if you're in a linear market, you just see what just happened there with the cash flow versus what you're paying for it. You're literally paying back the person who you borrowed it from less than what you borrowed, but you get to
Yeah.
then have this compound increase in what your cash flow becomes. And then, in year 3, you're not just getting the same $30. Year 3 is 3% of the new 1,030, right? It may be only 1,030, and I had this written down at one point. I've kind of written all over it now, but it's may only go up like 9 cents or something like that. But you start to see the compound growth over time, and within about a 3-year window, those increases in your cash flow will then overshadow what you thought you would have been getting with that 3.625 interest rate. It doesn't take long, a couple of years to go by with you buying a property. And this is what I tell all my clients: you're the CEO of your real estate investment firm. If you did the job right, which you're going to buy with the right people in the right area, a particular property, which is one small business that you can continue to raise rents on, that you believe will stay reasonably rented for the time you own it. If you can do that job right, within a couple of years, it doesn't matter what the interest rate is, you've already passed it. And then, of course, every time you raise rents, that 3%, you get that compound growth, and then that compound decline that continues to separate so quickly that it's not going to matter 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now. Think about what 30 years from now feels like. For you, it's awesome. Wherever you borrow the money from,
Yeah.
whoever really sat down and did the numbers, they're pissed. But a lot of people will say is, if that's the truth, and that's what's happening, why is the banking industry willing to allow us to have 30-year fixed loans if they're truly losing money like that? Well, how often do we have refi booms? You guys ever noticed?
Refi booms. I think typically somebody refis every 7 years or so.
maybe even less now. I mean, geez.
I seem to see that like every 4 to 5 years in my career. I've been doing this since '97. It seems like it's constantly coming. It's like just as people seem to be leaning out in the industry, out with just the people that are doing purchases, bam, we get another refi boom back, and all the idiots are back in the market wanting to be loan originators, right? And so because it's easy, you're shooting fish in a barrel. We're just doing low rate refis. So what I explained to people there. So when you think about that, they spend the millions upon millions of dollars in marketing to get people to refi that house every 4 to 5 years. So what does the first 5 years look like on an amortization table? It's like
all profit.
Yeah, it's all very, very heavy interest. You're going to pay some principal, but hardly any. So if you can get a person to pay on just a little bit of principal in the first 5 years, then convince them to refinance that, and then add the cost back on top of the loan, get it back to where that principal was to begin with, never even getting it paid down, just resetting it, and then put them back in a heavy interest period. Does it matter to the banking industry what the rate is at all?
No.
Because you're just getting interest anyway. On top of that, it's a Wall Street trade. How many people have had a broker that is managing their fund for them that continues to trade in and out of the market and seems to never make a damn dime on their retirement, but he seems to always get paid? Does it happen?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Constantly. That's the biggest complaint we hear. That's probably one of the reasons the infinite banking strategy you guys are doing is even getting traction, because people are sick of somebody else making money and they're not making anything. It's the same thing with mortgages. Mortgages are a Wall Street trade. Every time one closes out and gets a new one, they just did a trade of the capital. Somebody just made more money. So this is literally just another one of those games that's being played. No different. And that's why the Big Short story there tells you a little bit about how it got started and how they keep trading that capital. They don't care how often it trades as long as they get paid. But whoever invested in it is the one who's potentially at risk if people ride it out for the entire 30 years, but they've been programmed not to. So one thing I like to tell everybody, and I'll hit it here. I know this is a point that I want everybody to remember, is you got to leverage high, leverage long, and pay off slow. You do that and remember that. And the only time you refinance is if you're pulling cash out to buy more investment properties. I believe you can continue to dominate in the real estate investing world.
Well, on that note, I've noticed that there's been a push lately, and you may have seen some commercials, particularly on Quicken Loans, of doing a
15-year thing.
Yeah, 15-year. What's your take on that?
I think that's asinine.
Okay, for people who are listening to it, he just like Couples Retreat, he put a hypothetical gun to his head when he heard that question. But so go ahead.
So hell, let's just run the numbers, right? I'm going to put this right in front of us. So we have the 5% loan here, right? $100,000 price with $80,000 loan amount, $429.46. We did the numbers here, and I'm going to have to drag it all the way back down and probably blow right by it again. Guess if I look the numbers aside, I'll figure out when to stop. I hit 360. So we had shown here 64,550.68 is what you're paying on this loan over 30 years, correct?
Yeah, and that's the inflation adjusted for inflation. Okay.
Correct. Inflation adjusted payment 64,550.68 with
Okay.
a total principal and interest over 30 years of 154,604.
Okay.
So let's switch this to a 15-year, and let's say they gave you a better rate of, say, it's usually about what, a quarter, 3/8% difference.
Yeah.
Let's say it's 4.625%, just for argument, 3/8, right? And then let's switch this to a 15-year. I'm gonna have to scroll again.
Ooh, wow, this is interesting.
Well, so what I'm gonna have to scroll up here and do a couple different scrolls.
Okay.
So now you're looking at $617.12 a month, which you're paying it off in 15 years. You got to increase what you're what you're paying, right? And so to be able to get that to pay off 15 years, you had a total that you're paid off of total principal and interest of $111,081. So you can see the difference there. You're like, wow, that's pretty attractive.
Yes.
I'm dropping down from 54,000 in interest down to 31,000 in interest. Really, really sexy. But look at the inflation adjusted payment. It's 68,000. Why is that the case, right? Why did it go up? Why am I paying more when I'm actually paying less? Is what a lot of people think. I'm paying less in interest, paying more inflation adjusted payment. You wonder why that is?
Yes.
Because you're giving them more money while the dollar is worth more. The dollar has not been eroded during that. You don't have that compound decline in the dollar's value that the last 15 years really has. So that first 15 years, it's worth closer to the value of the day you borrowed it.
Okay.
When you get to that last 15 years, it's now eroded at a larger amount, so you're paying them back less. You know, definitely whoever is putting that capital up, and let's run these numbers again real quick. So you guys have that number, those numbers in front of you. The 111,000 principal and interest, and then the 68,580.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to do a screenshot here because I got a memory as long as a hangnail. So if we're gonna,
I got the inflation adjusted.
Okay.
You want to get the other one?
I'll move that over here, and then so I'm going to go back to this and switch this back to 5 on a 30-year. So
yeah, go ahead.
74,000 interest over 30 years on a 5% versus 31,000 on a 15-year. That's big. That is freaking huge, right?
Yes. So in essence, you're saying that on the 30-year, we paid more interest.
Yeah, paid nearly more than double the interest you paid, right? Mm-hmm. But the inflation adjusted payment over 30 years, when you use that declining instrument, you're going to pay $64,550 over 30 years. But on the 15-year, you're paying $68,658. You're paying more when you pay less.
Okay, very interesting view, because I would say the second favorite video that we've produced is the second favorite of mine is we did a video and did the numbers. Should we get a 15 or a 30-year mortgage? What I like that in there, we were comparing more kind of all of the numbers, because the interest and then with the payment, right? If on a 15-year payment, your mortgage is going to be higher. So you have to account for that extra increase in the mortgage premium. So we have to have some sort of growth factor for that. And we do all that in the video, but here I like how you're narrowing it down to the really just the capital or the assets that left your account adjusted for inflation. is actually more when you're doing a 15-year mortgage, right? And a lot of times people would think they're focusing solely on that interest, that I'm paying less interest on a 15-year mortgage, which is true, right? But your mortgage is also higher, right? So what are you doing, or what could you do with that extra payment, right? Maybe you could buy more real estate, or maybe because as you know, as we love real estate, but you're going to have some tough times. There's going to be some repairs. There's going to be some vacancy, but at least now maybe we're going to have some more liquidity. So when those tough times come, we have the cash flow to help absorb it. But also, you'd mentioned on the 30-year, we are paying much more interest, right? But that interest is also tax deductible. So we're creating some tax advantages. So, man, this is just one of the many reasons with real estate that we can leverage against it, and we can get that 30-year mortgage, right? That's going to be fixed for 30 years. And as you shared with us, Aaron, that your rent is going to go up with inflation.
So,
I'm
and
just getting more excited.
There's a couple other points here that we want to be sure we touch on. So number one, like you just said, the tax deductibility. You're literally paying less over time, but you're deducting more on your taxes, right? So you're increasing your wealth in that respect. Secondly, if you get a 30-year loan, you can always pay a 30-year like a 15. If you just cannot help but pay it off early because your dad was old school, he went through the Depression, you guys ate Spam your entire damn life, that kind of thing, you have no choice but to pay this off because it's in your blood. Then get to 30 anyway, because you can always pay it that way if you need to. But if one day you happen to stumble and hit your head on a rock and it all starts to make sense, you don't have to refinance to do it, right? You now get on track. The other thing of it is getting a 15-year loan at a better rate these days is even harder. We ran this number just because traditionally the 15-year is lower. I'm not finding a 15-year that's a lower interest rate. Now, maybe Quicken is, maybe Quicken's actually securitizing it themselves just to drive more business and convince people to do this, which, is them just trying to make money. But in my opinion, there's no opinion, there's a reality. Interest rates, I can't get that because what I'm finding is that our sources understand that there's some shit going down in our economy at some point. And when it does, a person with a fixed 15-year is going to have a hell of a time paying that compared to their 30-year. Even if they get the 30 and they pay it like a 15, they can always go back to the 30 to maintain their house. So when you lock a person in and you start limiting their choices, you put yourself at potential risk that those choices might come back and bite you in the ass as the lender. Now, the other aspect of it is, like you said, your cash flow is now being sucked up by the lender. You're giving it to them. You're giving them the cash flow. They're making that cash flow on that because eventually you're going to refi it again anyway, right? Now, when it comes to that, to me, that's no different than somebody convincing somebody to put 25% down because it's a lower interest rate. I think that's also a disservice. And the reason how I express that to people is even though the rate's a little bit lower, let's say you put 25% down to get an extra $30 a month in your payment. I've actually even run those numbers. It was even more than that. It was like 41. But let's say it's $30. You put that extra 5% down. Well, now you have, instead of being able to take $100,000 and buy 5 properties, you got $100,000 to buy 4 properties, and you made extra $30 per property. That $30 per property, 3 times 4 is $120, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. That's pretty good. But if you took that extra 5% on those 4 properties and used that to put 20% down on the 5th, and that 5th made you $200 a month in cash flow, which is the better deal? 5 properties at 20 or 4 at 25?
5 at 20.
Already 5 at 20 is better just by $80 out of the gate. Now let's get into the 3% rent raise. You raise rents by 3% on those 4, right? That had $1,000 a month rent. You get an additional $30. But what if you did raise your rent by 3% on 5? You can see how this starts to get out of hand. And then you start getting the fact that you have tenants now paying down 5 properties instead of 4 properties, right? And then you have the tax deduction with a higher interest rate on 5 properties instead of 4 properties, even when you're making more cash flow. You got to look at it from the right angles. Too often people have been coached the wrong way. A lot of the coaching comes from people on the real estate side. And I'm not saying that they're completely wrong. I think they're just too narrow-minded when they're looking at cash on cash return or cap rates or pro formas and trying to show where the value is in that one deal for that first, they're wrapping their head around the whole portfolio on a long term. In fact, I try to tell everybody, pro forma, you got to remember, you can't live and buy by the pro forma. Pro forma is an old Latin word for bullshit. It's all made up information that we don't know the real numbers until you actually get into the property.
Yeah. I laugh because when I worked at Price Waterhouse, before company was going public, we would spend all this time in the pro formas and you just want to make it look better. So you know what? I think our sales might go up a little extra 0.25% this quarter. I mean, it's just, I didn't know the formal meaning of pro forma, but it's true. Okay. Well, let's talk about, you'd mentioned about analyzing deals. Like one rule of thumb I've commonly heard is the 1% rule, where the value, your monthly rent should be 1% of the purchase price. In fact, we had somebody on a little bit ago and saying the 2% rule. I've never heard the 2% or 2% of the rent of the purchase price being in rent, but
maybe that's possible in like a big old 100 unit apartment complex, possibly. I don't know, but
yeah, I don't think it's somebody who wasn't a big fan of single families who said that, but
I talk to a lot of people who aren't big on single families, like, well, why would you waste your time on that when you can have apartment complexes? And I get that, going big, you got to start somewhere, right? And there's plenty of people out there that will help a person do apartments. There's people that do that on the commercial side like crazy. There's only a handful of people that have the guts to stick it out and do this single family shit, because it's tough. It's a tough business to do. It's a tough business to break into. It's a tough business to build your brand in. And it's a tough business to continue to keep doing. As you can see with Fannie and Freddie coming in and just taking the rug out from underneath you, or at least the U.S. Treasury did, it's not an easy business to play in. That's why I like doing it, because not a lot of people want to go through the hell that it takes to be successful in this. I find the tougher I make my business, the steeper the climb, the rockier the climb, the more treacherous the trail with the more poisonous serpents on it, the fewer people that will follow me. So that's why my business continues to grow. And I plan on it's going to be more than quadrupled in the next few years. And that's the goals that I have. And it's now become an even steeper climb with what Fannie and Freddie pulled. Now, when you're talking about going back to your initial comment with respect to the 1% rent to value ratio, I'm not exactly certain where that even came from, right? I just been hearing that ever since I started working with the real estate investor. That's what I kept hearing, 1% rent to value ratio, which would be 1% of whatever you bought the property for, whatever the property's value is. There's a good gauge for you to try and at least buy a property that will rent for that. Now, is it possible right now? Not really. When you have this compound increase in the value of homes, the way that they're going and the prices are going up because the demand is so steep, not all driven, but heavily driven by low interest rates, trying to get the rental market to keep pace with that is very, very hard, because the rental market established that 1% rent to value ratio, actually better than that, like 1.2 to 1.4, go back 3-4 years before the rates start doing what they're doing now. And then all of a sudden it passed that area because the demand blew up the real estate value so high that now it's going to take time to catch up. When you're only talking about 3% increments as far as their growth in their rents, it's going to take a while, but it will catch up with that, because I think we're going to see a property price kind of recede a bit as rates go up and normalize the market. But it's going to take a little while to get there. But I tell everybody, when they tell me, it's like, well, what if I can't get that 1% rent to value ratio? Is all your equations off? Like what we talked about earlier with that $100,000 property at 20% down. I'm like, well, that's why I threw out a $200 a month cash flow. $200 a month cash flow with a $100,000 property, most people would thumb their nose at, right? So it's easier to achieve $200 a month in cash flow, even though you're not able to achieve the 1%. But if you can achieve the 1%, it's going to be extremely easy to achieve $200 plus in cash flow. So my equations were by design, so a person doesn't have to have all things to feel confident in moving forward.
Okay, so one thing we talked a little bit this before we started was, and I'm going to try to summarize this question, but to me it looks like when people are, and I'm not talking investors, I'm talking somebody's going to buy a home for themselves. They're focusing on what their mortgage payment that they can afford. I can afford $2,000 a month, and then they say, well, what kind of house can that buy me? And when interest rates go down, your dollar buys more house. And I'm wondering if you feel that is affecting the price of the real estate market.
Oh, definitely is affecting the price of the real estate market because people have the opportunity to bid on more. What you have more people in the game for that specific price range than what was before. So when you can increase the number of people that are bidding, you're going to increase the price. So now when we start seeing the rates go up and fewer people can qualify for that specific house or that price range, that's when you see the prices start to go down and shrink a little bit because they're going to be going into lower price points.
Okay, so you're envisioning when interest rates go up, there's going to be an adjustment to the.
There's going to have to be. So it's no different than right now where interest rates were down. People were bidding over price of 30,000 over price, right? It's happening all over the place. Interest rates go up, and you have less and less people bidding for the house. Therefore, they're going to start seeing the opposite happen. You're going to have start seeing listings go out there, and then of course, agents going to put it out there, and after 90 days, so maybe we should drop it $5,000. Maybe you should drop it another $5,000. Maybe you should drop another $5,000 until finally somebody gets into it. So you may start seeing people take a price point and have to lower it 30,000 just to sell it. So the market always is going to go one way or the other.
Okay. Now, what have you seen currently with a moratorium on foreclosures? And what do you think it's going to look like when that's removed?
So I haven't seen a lot out there just because I'm so narrowly focused on the real estate investor.
Which is really kind of probably the biggest concern our listeners have. Sure. Of these, they're probably, a lot of them are on the fence. Maybe they're buying some properties, or maybe they're about to buy their first one. You're like, there's some concern of what this is going to happen to their investment properties.
And I can see the concern that they're having. I've had a lot of people actually ask me that question about what happens when they start going to foreclosure. Should they actually wait for that? Should they be more prepared for that time that happens? They can invest their capital into foreclosure and buying property on the cheap. What I explain to them is set your baselines and go for whatever deal fits your baselines or better. It's one of these things you can't, when you're trying to just adapt to whatever's laid in front of you and try to justify the purchase or not, justify a reason not to purchase, it's when you start putting yourself into potential failure. Sure, everybody wants to time the market. Everybody wants to get in when the properties are going to be at their cheapest, when you're going to be able to get more for bang for your buck. I get it. But I look at that as no different than being on the highlight reel on the Super Bowl game, right? If you're going to sit on the sideline and conserve your energy only for highlight reel plays, you're never going to be on one because the only people on the highlight reels have their ass on the field. Not on the
bed. That's good.
Yeah.
So in the same respect, I tell them just be on the damn field, and you have to set your baselines and stay within your realm. If the deal is there to buy, you buy the deal because the deal works. You don't buy it because it's the best time in the market to buy. And eventually, if you're on the field enough, you will end up picking some up at the best time in the market. And then you'll have someone that's not the greatest time in the market, but it still fit your baselines. It's still a good deal. You still made a good investment move.
Okay. The spreadsheet that you had showed was very powerful. And if you're listening on the podcast, we do record all these and we do post them on YouTube. So this one, or the only ones that we've pushed people to YouTube have been the ones with Aaron Chapman, right? Because he's always sharing some great information. But what I got from that was particularly, you were focused just on inflation and the taking that loan at today's dollars and then paying it back with lesser valuable dollars. And I would think that if you were, that down payment, a lot of the down payment's got to come from somewhere, right? That 20 or 25% down has to come from somewhere. And if we're able to, use infinite banking where that money's coming, that we're borrowing against our policy, right? So we're actually borrowing from the insurance company and paying them back. I would think that be interesting to do that with inflation on that, but I would think that that would only help these numbers and the more bang for your buck when we're incorporating infinite banking with a 30-year mortgage.
Oh, dude, when you start talking inflation, the possibilities are endless of what we can calculate. I've got Professor Abernathy working on. We're working together on an app. We've got app builders actually building the app out where will show the simple information we showed you with inflation and the inflation adjusted payment. And then we'll be creating some software behind all that for a person to basically manage all their real estate and how to factor in inflation into this. And then we do need to add in an infinite banking process to it, all that. It can be rather out of hand what we're going to be able to do with it. But that is a big part of it. And then also being able to keep on the fly adjusting to what real inflation is at that time, based upon what we get from shadow stats or the Chapwood index, either one of those to really plug in that inflation so a person can map it out. What we touched on was just one single number for inflation versus it could be 7% now, but in 2-3 years from now, because it's over supply of money that's being shoved out there, it could be 12, right? Now, if you did a 15-year loan, you just missed out on all that massive inflation you could have used to pay it off for you because you paid off too damn early. Because we know inflation is going to get out of hand further down the road. The longer we go, the more inflation is going to be a factor in this. So take advantage of the fact that we know inflation is coming. I know that everybody likes to use a reason to pay off early by that misquoted statement supposedly from Einstein about inflation being the eighth wonder of the world. Right. But one thing Einstein, and it wasn't even Einstein, didn't even say it. Somebody put that, I think, in the New York Post or the New York Times or something. Somebody wrote that, and people attributed to Einstein incorrectly quite often. And I used to quote this constantly thinking it was Einstein when I was corrected after a podcast. But ultimately, it was still said, and people used it a lot as justification. The one thing that whoever created that thought process never had a long-term instrument in a high inflation environment to put together. When you put those two together, inflation and compound interest beat the shit out of each other for you, the investor. All you got to do is have enough money for the beer and for the chips to watch the fight go on, and it all works out better for you. You win on both sides. No matter who you bet for, you still won.
Okay, Aaron, what would you say to somebody, maybe there's a listener's like, look, I just want to get into real estate. I don't need death benefit. I hear whole life's terrible. I just want to just go ahead and jump right in and buy real estate. Why should I run it through a policy? What would you say?
Well, I had that same thought process years ago. In fact, I had a client of mine who was selling the policies and that kind of stuff, and I thought he was insane because every life insurance policy I ever got, I got screwed on, right? So I thought this was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Why would somebody do this? And I was always involved in Universal or some other type of policy like that. And yes, I did get screwed every single time. But then I got the explanation and understanding of the whole life policy and how that works and this concept. And what I started using that was I took what I understood about real estate and started creating this engine in my mind. So I'll just tell you my scenario, my story.
Love it.
And they can do with it what they want. I'm better at answering questions with stories. There's this old saying, good judgment comes from experience and experience comes from bad judgment. Well, we've all exercised it in one way or another in our life. It's a great way to learn on the grade school playground, not a good way to learn in real estate. It can be very, very costly. And I have suffered those losses in my career. And now I'm back into a better position. I believe those losses were a great education. So what it was is I had about $90,000 I was going to invest in 3 properties. And before I invested in these 3 properties, I had to call this particular client and explain and I wanted to just support him in what he was doing. And he was doing these particular policies. Mm-hmm. And he just retired from the Navy on a career heading towards becoming an admiral, but yet decides to do life insurance instead and retires early. So I had to call him up and as a very good friend, ask him the question if you're freaking stupid. It's like, who the hell leaves a potentially an awesome career to do this? Well, that's when he explained it to me. I started to really, really wrap my head around it. When he explained it to me, one, he said he wouldn't explain it until I got my wife on a video conference call. It was GoToMeeting at that time. Zoom didn't exist. Or maybe it did. I just didn't know about it. So we sat down, we watched this, and he explained everything, and it just started to make sense. So what I did immediately after that is I took the $90,000. I got a policy for several million on me, right? So $90,000 went in there. Within a short window of time, I was able to take the majority of that out, borrow against that policy. I believe it was like 80 some odd $1,000. Able to borrow against, and I bought those 3 properties because I didn't need the full $90,000. Well, those 3 properties were generating at least $200 a month each in cash flow. And I was taking 10% of my income already to build that $90,000. So what I did then was once I bought those properties, I was taking the cash flow, $600 a month, and I was paying down the note against the policy, the 85,000, let's say it was, plus 10% of my income. I was paying it down with. Within a short window of time, I think it was about like 15 months, I was able to knock it down from an $85,000 loan to a $55,000 loan. Then I went and stripped that 30 grand back out and put out another property. And that increased from $600 a month, like 820 or 30 or something to that effect. So I was able to pay down that $80,000 note, $85,000 note even faster, plus 10% of my income. My income continued to go up because I continued to get better at what I was doing. So I was paying it down faster and faster and faster. Now that same $85,000 is now, I've actually cycled over 300,000 through it. And I have now created this engine that I can buy a house every 4 to 6 months if I wanted to with it, because I have this engine to do it. Now, the beautiful part of this for me is, one, now I have a purpose for that money and I get to use it that way, that engine. If I just put the $90,000 into real estate, would I have that engine? No. I would have cash flowing real estate, but I wouldn't have a pattern to develop from. The other thing is, what I love about it is my money has never left. It's always been sitting there. It's always been compounded. It's always been growing. In fact, I paid up additions and all that kind of stuff, and I just continue to grow it. And it's been about 5 years now, so you can imagine it's gotten pretty good. And I've created policies for each one of my children. My children now have to create policies themselves when they get married, because if they don't, they get out of my will.
Nice.
So, and I tell them it has to be 10%. So you got to set it up where you can do at least $50,000 a year in premium and paid up additions every year, because you're not making more than 50 when you're getting started, and their spouse has to do the same. Because if their spouse refuses to participate in that, again, they get written out of the will, because I'm not going to have anybody with influence over the resources that we leave. And I believe a lot of people like to talk legacy. They like to talk about legacy as money being left. Legacy is actually the education and the patterns that you create in the people that follow you. And if you have not created that, you've done nothing but make a bunch of well-funded assholes to run around and buy stupid shit, right? So I'm not going to have that. So what I've been able to show them is this engine, and I've been able to show others how to create that engine and continue to grow their wealth that way. And it's allowed us to invest into several $1 million worth of different investments. And it's been an amazing thing. And we sit down on I would say it used to be on a monthly basis, not as often as we used to because of what happened with COVID and all that. It got us out of our pattern. But we sit down and I show them in 4 years what we built from 90 grand to 2 point some odd $1 million in 4 years, all because you have an engine to work with.
Aaron, you also do mortgages, right? So and you only do investment, right?
Well, that's where I focus. I've helped a lot of people with their second homes and their owner occupied stuff, and some of their their kids and stuff with they're getting into housing. That's where I focus my energy on, because I understand the real estate investor better than buying a house because it's on the perfect street with the perfect kitchen and life will be perfect when I get it. It's my right to have this house I can't afford because I'm an American and all that kind of thing. I don't get all that stuff. But that's why I focused away from it to the real estate investor. But if there's an opportunity for something else, that we definitely will try and help people out the best we can. And that's just going to aaronchapman.com. You'll see a redneck sitting on a porch. It's the same porch that I referenced for the first book. And that's where we get started. Just there's videos on there. You can look at this podcast will go up in the media link. You got the loan process videos that share with people how we do what we do. Then there's the apply now tab. You can click on that and you can apply. You can also scroll down. We also have a campaign that we're pushing a lot towards. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Operation Underground Railroad, but we've been blessed to be able to raise somewhere in the range, I'm guessing about between 40 and 50,000 now between contributions from clients on the website directly to that, and then what we contribute for every $50 for every transaction we close.
Well, what does that money go to? What's the charity doing?
So these guys fight human trafficking. So there's go to Amazon Prime and check out Operation Toussaint, Toussaint. It is a documentary about Tim Ballard, who worked for the CIA and the State Department and the Homeland Security, and decided, the only way he could actually do more of his job. At the time, you're limited as a government employee on what you can do, is finding that a lot of the human trafficking was being consumed by Americans.
I tell you, Aaron, one thing I have enjoyed is the content that you put out on your email list. Like, because that's actually how I first heard about Fannie Mae making these changes, was from being on your email list. Is that possible for somebody just to get on your email list? Is that an option?
Oh yeah, and I don't know how that happens. I think really it's just a matter of going to the website, clicking on that, or clicking on the contact button, just saying, "Hey, put me on your email list," and send me.
Cool.
Aaron, thanks, man. Really appreciate your time. And as always, we got a master's class in finance and then also on personal development as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. I appreciate you allowing me to come on here a third time. I mean, usually my wife and kids get tired of me a lot faster than that. So thank you.
Well, Aaron, it's always a joy, man.
Yeah, we look forward to having you back.
I'm looking forward to that. We can schedule that anytime.
Awesome, man.
Go make it a fantastic day.
Take care.